Week 16 of the fantasy football season, and here's top 15 quarterbacks. I'm ranking this week number 1, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. I know the last few weeks, Jalen Hurts, his numbers definitely haven't been up to snuff, but this week I like the matchup a lot for Jalen Hurts versus the New York Giants, a team that he's had good success against. And this Eagle team, they just got to get back to the basics and getting the football to their playmakers like A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert, because I think at times Hurts, he gets too in love with running the football. So this week versus the Giants, a young defense and a defense that gives up a lot of fantasy points to quarterback on the season. I think Jalen Hurts has a good ball game this week. Number 2, Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills. So Josh Allen last week, he didn't have to do much to secure the victory versus the Dallas Cowboys. And this week, he had a great matchup with the Los Angeles Chargers that give up the 7th most fantasy points to QBs on the season. So right now, Josh Allen's got a big arm, having the best season out of all quarterbacks in fantasy points. And he's got good weapons as well, obviously. Stephon Diggs having a good year. Dalton Kincaid, even though he had a down game last week, I think bounces back with a good ball game. And he just spreads the football out, and James Cook out of the backfield, a good receiver as well. So this week at the Chargers, a defense that can't stop anyone, especially after last week giving up 63 points. I think Allen goes out there and has a big game on Saturday night at the Chargers. Number 3, Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs. And Mahomes, he's finally figured out that Rashee Rice is his go-to guy in the passing game behind Travis Kelce. So at least he's got 2 weapons in the offense that he can get the football to and make plays. And now Isaiah Pacheco returning in this game as well is definitely going to give a boost to this offense. So Patrick Mahomes, I know he hasn't been putting up elite numbers this season, but he's still putting up solid numbers. He's still putting up fantasy points. And this week versus the Vegas Raiders, I believe, could be one of the better games he has this season. Number 4, Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. So Lamar Jackson, he's having another solid season, definitely in the MVP conversation. And I know this week it's a tough matchup at San Francisco, but with his running ability on just getting 6-7 points per week minimum of running the football, I think Lamar Jackson could go out there and have a good game at San Francisco. And you know the ball's going to be in his hands even more with Keaton Mitchell out for the season, one of the more explosive backs in the league. Where now it's down to Gus Edwards once again and Justice Hill. So Lamar, good weapons in Beckham and Zay Flowers stepping up, and Isaiah Likely. And this week at San Francisco, I think he's going to get a lot of opportunities to still put up points on volume alone. Number 5, staying in the same game. And obviously this could be a Super Bowl matchup. Brock Purdy, an MVP candidate as well, and right now the front runner. What an offense it's been this season for the Niners. 11-3 on the year, winning 6 games in a row. And when you got weapons like Deebo Samuel 100% healthy right now, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield, it makes things easier for Brock Purdy and this offense. I know Baltimore's been one of the best units in the league as well, like San Francisco, and something's got to give. But Brock Purdy, weekly, he's pretty much putting up 25-30 fantasy points. You could pencil him in. I know it's part of the scheme, not just that he's a great quarterback. The scheme's helping him a lot. And this week versus Baltimore, once again, I will have confidence for Purdy with those weapons and the Kyle Shanahan scheme, even versus a good Baltimore defense. Number 6, Tua of the Miami Dolphins. So this week, a tougher matchup for Tua and this Dolphin team. I know last week the Cowboys gave up 31 points, but most of that was on the ground where they rushed for 200 yards was this Buffalo Bill team. So Tua right now has got a big arm. Tyreek Hill possibly could return in this game. I know last week versus a good Jet defense, he only scored 17 fantasy points. But when you got backs like Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane as well going out there and having good ball games, you don't have to go out there and do a whole lot. But this week versus the Cowboys, I think they're going to focus in on is Dallas and trying to stop Mostert and Achane and holding them down. And that's where Tua's going to have to go out there and throw. But when you got a Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in that offense, it doesn't matter the matchup. Tua's a guy that weekly could go out there and put up a monster performance. Number 7, Dak Prescott, staying in the same game of the Dallas Cowboys. So last week, Dak Prescott, after he was on a roll for 6 weeks where he put up monster numbers, 23 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, he came back down to earth and he didn't do anything in that ball game. A bad fantasy performance at Buffalo. So this week in Miami, I think this Cowboy offense could bounce back. I'm not saying they're going to go out there and win the game as the Dallas Cowboys, but I think Dak Prescott puts in a better performance. And this Miami defense, I don't think is as good as Buffalo, even though I know Buffalo has all the injuries this season. Still, I think Dak Prescott could go out there and have a bounce back game. And really back this season, he hasn't had 2 bad games in a row. So this week, I think he bounces back and puts in a decent performance and better weather as well, obviously, over there in Miami than it is in Buffalo. Number 8, Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. And Jared Goff last week, what a performance it was for him with 5 touchdowns in that one. And when you got great weapons like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Mia Gibbs out of the backfield, Jameson Williams starting to get going, and Josh Reynolds, a guy he's had good rapport with throughout his career, going back with the Los Angeles Rams. I think Jared Goff, once again, in the division matchup, I know on the road at Minnesota, where he's been way better at home than he's been on the road. His splits are pretty ridiculous, is Jared Goff this season. But this week, even in a road matchup in Minnesota, defense that is bend but don't break at times, I think Jared Goff could go out there and get a good performance. Indoor game, which is always a plus. And when you got weapons like he does on the offense, it's hard for a guy like Jared Goff to really have that many bad games. And this week here, I know on the road it's been difficult, but he goes out there and has a good game. Now, Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams, a Thursday Night Football. Stafford and the Rams welcome the New Orleans Saints to town. And I know the Saint defense has been playing good football over the last few weeks here. I know last week it was a weak Giant offense they shut down. And Saint team is a tough matchup here versus Stafford and the Rams. When you got weapons like Cooper Kupp, who finally looks pretty healthy, Puka Nacua, Kyren Williams, one of the best running backs in the league this season, it's going to be tough to cover all those guys. And Matthew Stafford, he's been healthy over the last few weeks. He's playing with confidence. And this week on Thursday night, when it's usually shootouts, I like him having a good game. Number 10, Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Baker Mayfield, what a season it's been for him, and arguably his best season of his NFL career. So former number 1 pick. He's bounced around the last few years with Carolina, after Cleveland. Then he went to Rams, and now this year maybe he found a home with this Tampa Bay Buc team on the 1-year deal. So Baker Mayfield last week, what a monster performance it was, over 35 fantasy points. This week, Tampa Bay back at home. And this Buc team, they got a chance to win the division, in first place right now. So with the Jacksonville Jaguars coming to town, a defense that does create a lot of turnovers, but also a defense that has given up some big games this season, I think Baker Mayfield could go out there once again and have a solid performance. And when you got weapons like Rashad White, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin, who finally had a big ball game, you're due for good fantasy days. And Baker, for the most part, his floor has been 20 fantasy points. So once again, I think he goes out there and has a good performance. Number 11, Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. Up and down few weeks here since Kyler Murray returned to the lineup after coming off the ACL injury, and rightfully so. He's not going to be 100% right away, is Kyler Murray. It takes a while for players to get their legs on the room, but this week he does have a good matchup at the Chicago Bears. He is Kyler Murray, and you know, weekly he's good for 5 to 6 fantasy points minimum on the ground. So the Bears defense, I know, definitely have played better over the last few weeks, but they still give up points and still give up touchdowns. And we even seen Joe Flacco last week scored 20 fantasy points on this bad defense. So Kyler Murray, he's got decent weapons. Trey McBride, he's been one of the better tight ends over the last couple months of the season. He had a big game last week. I think once again he has a good one. James Conner out of the backfield. Then we'll see if Hollywood Brown plays in this one as well. But Kyler Murray, even not at 100%, he's still a quarterback that I think could go out there in a pretty good matchup and put in a decent performance. Number 12, Justin Fields of the Chicago Bears, staying in the same game. So Justin Fields, it's been an up and down season for sure for him. Some games we've seen him score 40 fantasy points, and then some games you only see him scoring 10, 13 fantasy points. So this week, a good matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals that give up top 10 numbers to quarterbacks on the season in terms of fantasy points. And he's got good weapons as well. DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, who's been great at the tight end position. Darnell Mooney, I know it hasn't been that great of a year, but he's always a deep ball threat as well. And you got Roschon Johnson, who can catch some passes out of the backfield. And Justin Fields, we know he's a quarterback that's looking to run a lot. And sometimes that's what does Justin Fields in, where he just holds onto the football too long and makes mistakes. But this week versus Arizona, I think he could have a decent ball game. 18-20 fantasy point range definitely is a possibility in this one. And Fields, he just has to make quicker decisions. 13, Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. So Jordan Love, he's been a solid fantasy quarterback this season here. Top 12 in fantasy points, believe it or not. And this week here, a middle-of-the-pack matchup at the Carolina Panthers. And I know his receiving core has been banged up the last few weeks. We saw Christian Watson miss the last few games. We saw last week Jaden Reed leave that game. We'll see if he's going to play in this one. But Jordan Love, he's a quarterback that's been spreading the football out, and guys are making plays still, even these 4th or 5th stringers at receiver. We saw Wicks last week have a good game after Reed went out. We've seen Romeo Doubs have a good season, and the last few weeks we've seen Tucker Kraft fill in good for Luke Musgrave. So I think Jordan Love in a decent matchup with the Carolina Panthers could go out there once again and provide 20-plus fantasy points possibly for fantasy owners this week. 14, Jake Browning of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Jake Browning's been a perfect fill-in for Joe Burrow, who's out for the season. 3 games in a row the Cincinnati Bengal team has won, and Jake Browning's had at least 22 or more fantasy points in those ball games. So I know Jamar Chase most likely out in this ball game, which is definitely a big blow for this offense. But I think even with T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Tanner Hudson, Joe Mixon, and Chase Brown, who's been emerging out of the backfield as a receiver a little bit, still could go into Pittsburgh and make some plays. So Jake Browning, he's been a solid quarterback the last few weeks, and definitely a guy with a chip on his shoulder after he's been cut by many teams over the last few seasons. So right now he's playing to be a well-known name in the NFL, trying to keep his team in the playoff, onto which he is. And this is a big division matchup at the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Jake Browning, once again, I think could go out there and have anywhere from 18-20 fantasy point range, even without his number one wide receiver in Jamar Chase, because the Steelers the last few weeks, their secondary's definitely been leaky. KZ suspended for the rest of the season, and the 15th and final quarterback I'm ranking is Gardner Minshew with the Indianapolis Colts. So Gardner Minshew, the ultimate gunslinger, quarterback that goes out there and he takes the chances to get the ball down the field. He puts it up for grabs at times, and that's the only thing with him. There could be turnovers and bad ones at times for Minshew, but this season he's playing good football, and this Colt team is the thick of things, 8-6 on the season. So hopefully Michael Pittman is back in this game after taking that monster hit. I don't know how he got up only after a couple minutes, where you thought it could have been more serious than that. So if Pittman's back in the lineup, those are where the numbers really emerge here for Gardner Minshew. But he spreads the football around, and like I said, he's a gunslinger in this offense, and he fits this Indianapolis Colts team pretty well this season. So with a decent matchup at the Falcons, where their secondary's been leaky over the last few weeks, and another indoor game, which is always a plus. I got him as a 15, so that's the top 15 quarterbacks I'm ranking for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.